Meanwhile, we need to talk about something which is taking place. So Guild Living and Legal and General, they want to help older people live better lives. It's based on research which has been done, and we are beginning to see some developments which are very different with the way that perhaps older people are looked after. Joining me now is Eugene Marchese, who is involved in this. Eugene, very good morning to you.
Good morning, James. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. So you're the co-founder and director of Guild Living. Tell us a little bit about Guild Living and what you do.
Well, James, I think the operative word is that we're about living. You know, we're about changing the way that older people will spend that third part of their lives. You just made the comment about you're 50 and you're not thinking about retirement. Well, I think no one really ever wants to think about retirement, because the reality is that we are growing older, and we're growing older healthier with better well-being, notwithstanding current events. But the reality is that the current way that people move into that third part of their life, we believe, is not very good. And what we're looking to do is to reimagine that and to reinvent that into a really fulfilling part of your journey. And that means that, you know, it's re-looking at where you live, how you live, what you do when you live in that third part of your life. So we're looking at a very holistic way to in other words, not retirement living, but that later living part of your life.
Now, we've seen a lot on our news about care homes in the last few weeks and months, and an awful lot of it has been very distressing, I think, for people in terms of how care homes have perhaps been, you know, impacted by the pandemic, various other things. I'm assuming as a result of that, people are going to have to think about later life and later life living in a slightly different way. We can't just park people off, you know, into homes. Does that mean that, you know, we're going to have to reinvent where, for example, we ask older people to live and the sorts of services that they require?
Well, I think the tragic part of COVID-19 is that it's brought into laser focus, James, that whole notion that, you know, older people have been kept a little bit of sort of, you know, out of sight, out of mind, and the consequential events of that here has been demonstrated in you know, what's before us. You know, we've got older people who are dying in their tens of thousands in a matter of months. Now, if that doesn't make us stop and think about, you know, what are we doing right and what are we actually doing wrong in terms of how older people are being accommodated, well, nothing ever will. So we need to use this unfortunate events, or we need to use these unfortunate events to re-look at what is a care home meant to be. And, you know, I get asked all the time, you could probably hear from my accent, I'm from Australia originally, and when you compare what's happening down there with what's happening here in care homes, I mean, I think Australian deaths in care homes in Australia due to coronavirus are in their 20s, and here they're in their tens of thousands. So that's got to bring to focus that something isn't right. Now, there's a whole lot of factors driving that, and you know, that's.
But does that mean though that we have to change our view, because some of this is also based around the tax system. So we have had a society that has bought their homes and aspired to buy homes, and has made it very difficult for people to then sell out of that particular property and then maybe give assets to children or grandchildren or do what they want to do with it, combined with the fact that they haven't been incentivized in any shape or form to then put their money into something which might be, I suppose, for later life living, but then to be able to pass that on. Because the other point is that if you've got an investment in, or you've got an apartment or a house or whatever it is in some kind of shared living accommodation that provides you with all those services, how on earth do you create a market which is not going to be deep discounted as and when it comes to sell that asset on? Because, say, for example, if you're wanting to leave it to your children, you don't want to leave them at, you know, some kind of retirement home, do you?
Well, I think you just nailed it on the head there, James. The reality here is it has to start with policy. There has to be a cohesive approach to making sure that people are incentivised to leave the family home. Now, when you think about it, there is so many, you could probably count them in the millions in the UK, homes where someone who's over the age of 75 is rattling around in a 3-bedroom home, typically on their own, that could be better purposed to a family, but that person has no incentive to move into a retirement community or a what we're calling later life community. And that starts with the fact, the first decision they've got to make is, do I really want to pay that sort of stamp duty to sell my home and move into a new property? So there's all these connected events and policies that will influence and incentivise people to move out of that home. But here is the important part, that unless you deliver a better offering for that person to be incentivised to move into, then you get what you've got now in the UK, which is less than 1% of people over the age of 65 in the UK live in a retirement community. And when you compare that to Australia or the US or New Zealand, which are in the 10s and 12%, you've got this huge, difference in markets. But it's all starting with policy. You make a really good point. I think if there's more focus on to talk about stamp duty is a classic example. You're buying your last home, and yet the reality is you've got to pay stamp duty like someone's buying their first home after this person has spent their whole lives paying taxes. So I think, and the government doesn't actually get the benefit of that because there's a blockage in the system. So you're right.
There are a whole range of issues which I think then lead on from it. So it looks like, on one hand, it's providing the service and the opportunity, and the other hand is pushing for legislation change. Eugene, we're out of time, but thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. If people want to find out more about Guild Living, where do they go?
If you go to guildliving.com, they'll learn a lot more about us. Thank you, James.
Perfect. Eugene Marchese, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning, co-founder and director of Guild Living, talking about a different kind of way that we perhaps treat our older people, and looking in particular at the changes that we might need to see in our legislation.